when your child is struggling with mental illness, it's really hard to know if anything is helping. Here's my brother, talk to him. And he came out and he had met with God. And a breeze came along and flipped the pages over in his Bible, and he looked down and it read, "The Death of Josiah." I don't want that to happen to me. I'm going to obey God. But he got on the plane and he had this overwhelming feeling that he needed to get off the plane. I felt like God wanted me to stay here, and I'm just going to follow and see where God leads me next. And God walked him home. Anyone who believes in me will live even if they die. And if they die believing in me, will live again. Do you believe this? And I read those words, and I looked up out the window, and the trooper car was pulling into my driveway. Josiah Anthony Martin. I think there's something special about your firstborn. Not that you don't love every one of your children, but my mother told me that once, and then she goes, "And your lastborn," which I was her lastborn, so she just had to put that in there. But you know, all the firsts, if nothing else, right? They're the first to do all the things. Oh, yeah, Josiah had such a David heart, I would say. He felt all the emotions, and they were all right out there on his sleeve. He loved music and dancing and acting. He was in a bunch of plays. When we were in Juneau, we were very involved in a children's theater, and some of my favorite memories are him on stage. He was just so alive and having such a blast that it was just so fun to watch him. Um, he's a musician, plays the guitar, and sings. I don't remember him ever doing much drawing. He did a little bit of cartooning when he was in elementary school briefly, but it's not like he ever really did art per se. But um, he has this eye for seeing video, like, and editing and how things should be. Um, so after high school, he didn't know what he wanted to do. And we had a guy in our church who had a local business that did audio visual stuff. So, for instance, if you were going to have an outdoor concert, you could hire him and he would have all the sound equipment and the speakers and run all that for you. Or he would contract to do commercials sometimes for people. So I actually asked him if he would take Josiah on as an intern or something, and he agreed to do that. And he paid for him to go to a class over the winter session at the university on filmmaking, and then he hired him and to help on commercials and different things he was doing around town. And through that class and through working with this guy, he got a lot of contacts around town, so that then he was doing things like videotaping the commencement exercises at the university, or their hockey games, or conferences and things going on around town. Eventually, he got hired by the local television station and was working on commercials for them and running cameras for the news. And then they put him in as the anchor on Saturday nights, which was an absolute blast to watch him read the news. And I can't even tell you how many pictures I took of my television, of him on the television, because it was just so fun to see him sitting there in his suit and bantering with the sports guy, and they
I'd
who
love
was
to
also
see that.
and it was just so funny. I remember this one. There's a thing in, I don't know if maybe it's everywhere, but they have a thing called no shave Vember. For November, you're not supposed to shave, and I think it's supposed to be awareness for something. But you know how so many of those awareness things are just funny things that we forget what the awareness is for. Anyway, these two young guys who could, barely grow facial hair are not shaving for November, and then they're bantering about, yeah, well, I've been, or just funny because like you can barely tell that they're not shaving. So anyway, it was very cute. Um, but the part of having this David heart in, he could have all these really highs, performing and being on camera and creating music and things where he was high, he could get equally low. From being 12 years old and bringing his baby brother's dead body to his mother on, he would have periods of depression and really, really low points. And so he had been working in the industry around town for a few years. And then he got hired after the news. He got hired by a local marketing company, and he was creating commercials for them, for all kinds of people around town. And that was really fun too, because he would send me clips, or he would show us, oh, well, he'd be over and we were watching TV, like, oh, I made that commercial, when it's on the TV. So that was really great. He had moved out and was renting a house with a couple other guys. So this was after Linnea's cancer treatment, and we were back home and traveling for appointments, but primarily at home there in Alaska. And he had some really low points where he told me that he had called the suicide hotline more than once, and that was really, really difficult as a parent. I'm sure anybody could imagine. You don't want to see your children suffering. It was, really difficult when it was Linnea and it was physical. But with that, you feel like, okay, the doctors have a protocol, they have a plan, it seems to be working. You feel like you're working towards something. When your child is struggling with mental illness, it's really hard to know if anything is helping, because there would be times where it seemed like he was doing better, and then times where he clearly wasn't. He would try medication, but he didn't like the way it made him feel, so he'd throw it away. I hooked him up with a friend who was a counselor. He went to a couple sessions and then he stopped going. He, for a while, met with our pastor regularly and would they'd go out for coffee and lunch and stuff, and then he stopped wanting to do that. And we'd had so many great conversations, and others that were just so hard because you feel like you're talking to a brick wall, like nothing's getting through. I used to say that he had driven me to my knees more than any of my other kids. I'm not sure if that's true after Linnea's medical journey, but I've spent many, 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 many hours praying for him over the years. In 2021, he went down and visited his sister, who was living in Seattle at the time, going to the University of Washington. And he went down with a friend, and they were doing their own thing, traveling around. But then he went and spent the last day before he came back, he spent with his sister. And she really spoke to him about his faith and really challenged him to get right with God. She was working at a Christian camp at the time, and she took him back to camp and basically put him in the director's office and said, here's my brother, talk to him. And he came out and he had met with God. He really had a dramatic change. It was the first time in my life, having grown up in the church, that I got a deep sense of what the word converted meant, because it felt like he had converted into a different person. He had been in such a dark place for so long. And when he flew back to Fairbanks from that trip, he was light, like he had this light shining out of him, and he felt light, like he didn't feel like he was dragging himself around. He felt really himself and just at peace with himself. It was really beautiful. And then he told me he was working on a song that he was writing because of that experience, and could he sing it at church? I'm like, yeah, like I'm not in charge, but I was working at the church at the time, and our pastor loved him dearly too and had spent a lot of time with him. So when I texted him and said, Josiah has a song he wants to sing, he's like, sure. So So he did that next couple weeks later, and that was so neat because Lillian and her boyfriend actually flew up to Fairbanks that week, and she was able to be there too when he performed this song that he'd written that came out of the experience that she was an integral part of.
That
So
is
that was,
incredible. Do you have a
yeah,
recording of that?
yeah, I can share that with you.
Elohim, God with us, paved the way to a new day through Jesus. I was born a boy to become your son. It's by your grace there's a steady pace kept by my lungs. 24 years old, going on to 25. Life from on will not be the same. Your love has consumed me, polished all the memories. The harm is still to this very day. I can't go on reliving the shackles that once bound me. You're the only reason that I'm singing. For every wrong I've done, every evil I have brought into the world, void of your love. I give it all to you. Your light will see me through. I give up a life that wants to find my name. Elohim, God with us, you paved the way to a new day through Jesus. I was born a boy to become your son. It's by your grace that steady pace kept by my lungs. Oh, oh, Elohim, God with us, you paved the way to a new day through Jesus. I was born a boy to become your son. It's by your grace that steady pace kept by my lungs.
I love it. And what's neat about it is it's all about identity, and it's about how he knew that he was a child of God. That was really important to hold on to because the not to be too dramatic, but the demons of depression and anxiety and um, self hatred that he had been struggling with um, then continued to attack him after that. And I do think that a lot of it had to do with the fact that he was smoking marijuana regularly at that point. It was having undesired effects. It combining with the depression was causing him to experience things that were really, really scaring him. Over that next year, we had a lot of really hard conversations. So coming up on the spring of 2022, though, he seemed to be going through a period of healing. There were still some really dark times, but he was trying to heal relationships that there'd been that he felt like he needed to get some forgiveness, and he was like working on that. We had some conversations that were just amazing. One thing from that spring, summer, really the summer of 2022, I had shared an album with him that I found, actually a YouTube video, but it's a video that Phil Wickham did of his Hymn of Heaven um, album, but he sang the whole thing through acoustically in a hotel room. It looks like, I don't know, it looks like it's in California. Basically, what the video is it starts out with him singing. He looks like he's on a balcony, and then behind him is a highway and then a beach and the ocean. And then as it goes, the sun is setting, and then he steps out, and you're just basically watching the sunset and listening to him sing. I had watched it a few times. It was a great video. That summer, we were packing up our house, getting ready to go on this big adventure we've been on. And so I would just put it on the TV on repeat. And so I had shared that with Josiah. And like lots of things we share with our young adults, we don't know how much they're actually consuming that we share. One day he was over at the house and we were talking, and the video came on the TV. I think it just turned on the TV, and that's what had been playing last, so it started playing. And he just stopped. And I said, "Oh, that's that video that I sent you. I don't know." And he says, "Oh no, I've been watching it." Just kind of frozen there as he listened. Another day he was over and we were talking, and he said that he had been reading the Psalms, which was what our pastor Stan and I had both really encouraged him to, because we felt like he would really relate to some of the things that David said about being, the highs and the lows. And he told me he'd been reading recently in the Psalms, and that he had been sitting outside, and a breeze came along and flipped the pages over in his Bible, and he looked down and it read, "The Death of Josiah."
Oh my gosh.
He knew that he was named after this biblical king who was only 7 years old, 7 or 8, when he became king, and is called the greatest king in Israel because of all of the reforms and the way that he led his people back to worshiping God after they'd been very distant. So Josiah knew that part, but he said, I never knew how he died. So I thought, I'm just going to read that. And then he says, "Mom, Josiah died because he didn't obey God. I don't want that to happen to me. I'm going to obey God."
Wow.
So for King Josiah, what had happened was this other king wanted him to go to war. Let's go to war together and go against Egypt. And God told him not to go. And he decided to go anyway. And he ends up getting killed. Just a few days after that, he told, my husband's birthday was coming up on the next Sunday. I was planning a party. And so Josiah called up his dad and said, "I'm sorry, I'm going to miss your party. This friend has offered to take me has bought tickets for me to go to California with he and his wife. And so that's on Saturday, so I'm going to miss your party." And my husband said, "That's okay. I'm so glad you're going. That will be wonderful for you. Let's just go out to dinner Friday night." So they went out to dinner Friday night, and Josiah was again really apologetic about feeling bad he was going to miss his dad's birthday. And Tony said, "You know what? The best present you can give me is to go and have a great time and just relax," because he knew that Josiah had been pretty stressed out. He'd recently lost his job. He was trying to figure out what he should do next. He wanted to get back into the video industry. He was kind of just unsettled at that point, and wasn't sure what he wanted. So Tony said, "I just want you to go and have a great time." He and his friends were going to fly out Saturday morning. And so it was like Saturday afternoon, I got a text from his brother. So his brother Jacob had been living with him in this house. Jacob texted and said, "Can we come over for dinner tonight?" And I'm like, "Yes, but what we?" Because I thought Josiah left this morning. And he said, "Well, he ended up not going. And so can we come over?" I'm like, "Sure." So he comes over. I'm like, "So what happened?" And Josiah said that he got on the plane with his friend that morning, and this friend had paid for his plane ticket, his hotel, and tickets to Disneyland, and just really wanted to do that for him. But he got on the plane, and he had this overwhelming feeling that he needed to get off the plane. So he said that to his friend, and he's like, "Well, what's going on?" And he says, "I just feel like I need to be with my family." And he said, "Well, let's pray about it." So this friend prayed with him on the plane and then said, well, how do you feel now? And Josiah said, I need to get off this plane. And I don't know. I mean, so his friend said, well, then you better get off the plane. But I don't know what you say to the stewardess to get off the plane once the door is closed. But the door was closed, and that's what he did. So he got off the plane, and then he texted another young man who was a friend of his and goes to our church and said, I decided not to go. I feel like God wanted me to stay here, and I'm just going to follow and see where God leads me next. So he came over that evening. We had a great dinner, spent the evening together. It was just a lovely evening. And Tony went to bed because he got up really early then for work, so he tended to go to bed earlier. And it was 11:30, maybe 11:45 before they finally left, Jacob and Josiah, to go back to their house. We gave them big hugs and they headed out the door, and we'll see you tomorrow for the birthday party. So the next morning, I woke up to texts from Jacob saying that he got up and Josiah wasn't there. And because of Josiah's past, even though he'd been great the evening before, the first thing I said was, does he have his gun with him? And Jacob said he didn't know because he didn't like the gun. He was scared of it. And I said, well, I need you to go in his room and see if the gun's there. And he came right back and said, no, it's here. It's right here. It's sitting here. It's locked up and it's in this case. And like, okay. So Josiah had the car keys with him, but the van was home. But because he had the keys, Jake couldn't take the van. He'd been on his bike driving up and down their road, but didn't see anything. And then it had started to rain. So that's why he was calling, texting me. And so I woke up Tony and he said, well, I'm going to go over and get Jake and bring him over here. And I said, well, do you think I should do a missing persons report? Should I call the police? And we were kind of like, I don't know, like, does it merit that? Because there's been other times when, I mean, Josiah was 25 and there's been other times when we haven't known exactly where he is. Other times when, his phone's died and he's not answering or whatever. But then I remember I said, well, okay, but what if he got, in a car accident, or he's with friends, or he's hurt and he's in the hospital and he doesn't have his ID, then how would they know, who to call? So Tony's like, okay, yeah. And so he left to go get Jacob, and I called the police and I made a missing persons report. Then, I had to do the whole describing your child, and he had some pretty distinctive tattoos, and I could tell him, where he lived and such. And so, Jacob had said that when they got home the night before, Josiah had said he was going to go for a walk, and then Jacob went to bed. We knew that he'd gone for a walk. I knew where his house was, and, that's about all the information we had. So dispatcher, whoever took the report, said that a trooper would be in touch to ask more questions. And so then I hung up, and I was just kind of standing in the middle of the living room like, what should I do? Is there anything else I could do? I had texted Josiah. He hadn't answered. I tried calling. I'm trying to think if there's somebody else I could call or text. I did text a couple of his friends and say, that, do you know where Josiah is? Suddenly I heard in my head, I heard, I am the resurrection and the life. And I thought, I know Jesus said that, but I couldn't think in the moment, who did he say it to? So I got my Bible out and I looked and I found it, and he's come because his friend Lazarus has died, and he's having a conversation with Martha, Lazarus' sister. And he says to her, I am the resurrection and the life. Anyone who believes in me will live even if they die. And if they die believing in me, will live again. Do you believe this? And I read those words, and I looked up out the window, and the trooper car was pulling into my driveway. And so right about then, Tony had come back with Jacob, and they came in, and the trooper asked a couple questions like, He wanted to know, had Josiah gone for a walk from our house or from his house? As soon as he found out like where he was, and then he asked again about tattoos, and I told him about Josiah's tattoos. Then he said, at 12:15 last night, Josiah was hit by a car, and he didn't survive. And then he just said, I'm going to step outside and give you guys a minute. If you want to hear more details, just come outside and I will let you know. So he stepped out. Those words were ringing in my mind. I am the resurrection and the life. He who dies believing in me will live again. And I knew it like I'd never known it before, like in my bones, that Josiah was gone from the earth, but he was alive. And so I was able to, in that moment, pray. I held on to Tony and Jacob, and I thanked God for 25 years.
That is so hard.
Yeah. Yeah. So he was, it has been very hard. No doubt. But, so I prayed, we all cried. And then Tony said that he wanted to go outside and hear what exactly had happened. I decided to text my mom first. I knew that she was flying from Phoenix to Georgia that morning to go see my sister in Georgia. But I didn't know where she was at in that journey, and with the time zones, I didn't know if she was in the air or what time she was even supposed to get there or anything. I just knew that she was probably in transit somewhere. So I just texted and said, emergency, call me when you can. I texted her, and then I stepped outside, and because I said to Jake, I want to hear the details too. So he came with me. So there's just 18 months between the two of them. Jacob had lost his brother, his roommate, and his best friend.
Yeah.
So he came out, and the trooper gave us more information. He said Josiah had not walked very far down the road that they lived kind of off of a pretty major road, and he'd been walking on it at 12:15. So for people who aren't in Alaska, you need to understand this is mid-July. At midnight is not dark. It's very light in Fairbanks, Alaska. So he was out walking. What we were told, I've gotten some more details since then, but what the trooper told us that night was that a man was traveling 40 to 50 miles over the speed limit, was passing 3 cars on a double yellow. And Josiah was walking facing traffic. So this man came passing these other cars and hit him from behind. The trooper told us that he was listening to music, that Josiah had headphones on. And because he was coming from the other direction, I don't think he even saw the headlights or anything. I think he was just gone in an instant. He had said that morning, so this was 15 minutes after midnight. So Saturday morning, he had said that he was going to see where God led him. And a couple days before that, he had said he was not going to die because he disobeyed. So he was out taking a walk with God, and God walked him home.
Yeah.
And I believe he just didn't even know what hit him, literally, that he blinked and he was in the presence of his Savior. I'm very human, and the enemy likes to mess with us, especially mothers, make us think about scary things, hard things. God orchestrated the events of that night in such a way that the enemy had very little ammunition to throw at me. For instance, one fear that a mother, I think, would naturally have is that their child died alone. Well, all of those cars including the man that hit him, and all three of the cars that were passed, all stopped and all tried to help. One of those cars had 4 soldiers in it. So if there was anything to be done for Josiah at that moment, they would have known what to do, and 911 was called immediately. 12:15 was when the ambulance got there. So he'd only been walking for like 20 minutes. And in fact, the trooper finished giving us all these facts. My phone rang, and it was my mom. So I had to go to the other side of the house to get good reception. So I went over there and answered the phone. My mom was sitting on a broken plane in Seattle. They didn't know what was wrong with the plane, and they were all just sitting there waiting for information. When I texted her and she got it and she called back, and I could tell her what happened, she was able to hit her call button, tell them they got her off that plane, they got her a new boarding pass, and she was with us at 4:30 that evening.
Incredible.
I think nobody on that plane was going anywhere until she and I had connected, right?
Yep.
So from now on, when I'm on a plane and there's mechanical difficulties or they're not telling us what's going on, I'm going to start praying for whoever on that plane needs to be sitting just right there, right? Because
Absolutely.
she was just sitting there waiting. She was halfway to us before we knew that we needed her, right?
Yeah.
She was coming from Phoenix, flying to Georgia, and she was in Seattle, right? And Fairbanks is way up here. So she was halfway to us, and we didn't even know we needed her yet, right?
Yeah.
And to have her, be on the way, and it was just, what was so cool about that was it feels like I can tell you several times where right at the beginning of a really difficult journey, God did something spectacular. And I think it's so that the next days, months, years are going to be hard, but I have that to look back on. And it's certainly not the only thing God did or the last thing he did, but it was dramatic to help me to be seen, help me to be looking for what he's doing, right? To be actively looking for what is he doing, how is he providing, how is he showing up. And like I said, I believe that he's always at work in and around us, but there are times when we are more aware because of our need. Our need makes us more aware of what he's doing. And because our need is so great, I feel like he is more dramatic also to make sure that we see it so that we know that he's near.
Yeah.
That we're not alone, that he's at work, that he wasn't asleep at the switch, right? That he wasn't, just not paying attention that night. No, there were all of these things. There was the preparation of the conversations that I'd had with Josiah, this glorious moment of him sitting in front of the church singing, "I'm a child of God," completely knowing who he was in the middle of a dark, long journey through depression, in that moment knowing who he was, and then leading up to just weeks and days before when he has determined that he is going to follow God. And, the timing of these things is just so extraordinary. It reminded me of one of my favorite books of recent years, which is How to Pray, A Simple Guide for Normal People by Pete Greig. And I wanted to read this little bit. He says, he's talking about coincidences, basically, because I can say all of these things that God did and other small things that I can see are ways that God showed up and proved his love, showed me that he was near. But someone else could see the same things and think it's just coincidence, right? Well, how many times do things have to happen before they're not a coincidence anymore? Anyway, he said he was quoting Archbishop William Temple, and he said, The Archbishop said, "When I pray, coincidences happen. When I stop praying, the coincidences stop happening." In other words, the things are happening. When I pray, I see them, I'm looking for them, and I'm making those connections. God chooses to be moved by our prayers, but if we're not praying, he doesn't stop acting. He's also he's acting whether or not we're praying. But when we're praying, it's like we get to see and we get the opportunity to be grateful for the things that he does. So then further on, he's talking about this friend of his, James, and they had this incident where they were just swarmed by mosquitoes. And James was like, let's pray that the mosquitoes go away. And this breeze comes along and the mosquitoes go away. And Pete Greig, the author of the book, was kind of like rolling his eyes, like, I don't know if I believe this was actually God. And then he says, so he's trying to be less cynical. He says, but anyway, he says, James certainly knows how to pray big prayers about grave human suffering. He works at the forefront of the fight against human trafficking, so he knows how to pray about these serious things. But he also prays tiny prayers about trivial things with a beautiful childlike faith that enables him to receive things that others consider mere coincidences as blessings from his Father in heaven. So we can have the exact same things happen in our life, and one person could think, well, that's just a coincidence, and it could happen to this other person who has this childlike faith that God is at work and loves them, and they're receiving it as a gift and a blessing from God. Well, who's the happier person, right? Who's the person that's more at peace? And it reminded me of that picture that God gave me of the sailboat. Like, everybody on the sailboat is glad that they're not drowning, right? But the child who saw the giant hand knows who to thank, right? He knows that there's a person to thank and can receive that as a gift, and can also then be looking for that next time. So in the story, in Josiah's story, there were a lot of little things that could be, oh, it's just a coincidence. Well, here's a crazy one. On this street where he was hit, very residential, rural, not like residential like Phoenix where the houses are all boom, 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 but it's a street with a lot of streets off of it where people live, okay? The exact place where he was hit, directly across, was a residential lane called Martin Lane.
Oh, wow.
Martin Lane. It wasn't named Martin like our name Martin. It was Martin with an E, which is the animal martin, because there's martins in Alaska. But it's like a little weasel thing. But anyway, right there.
Yeah.
You know, we waited for a whole year from that. So the man who hit him was taken into custody that night. Like, it was clear who did it. There was all these witnesses. There was no question. It wasn't like you have to do a big investigation to find out who did it, right? Then, and I don't know all the workings of the legal system any more than I did the medical system with Linnea, he was out and they didn't have a good number for him, and none of his family knew where he was. So there was months and months and months where we were waiting to find out what was going to happen next. We'd listen into this hearing and they'd say, well, he didn't show up. Well, do you have contact information? No. So there's a warrant out for his arrest. And then we would just wait and not hear anything. Remember, in the original story, it was coming up on Tony's birthday. Josiah was going to miss Tony's birthday. So he actually died on Tony's birthday. And Tony had said, the best gift you can give me is to go on this trip and be at peace and relax and be happy.
Wow.
Well, on that day, on Tony's birthday, Josiah was more at peace and happier and more at rest than he'd ever been in his life. He had no mental illness.
Then he could have been at Disneyland.
He could have been at Disneyland and been the happiest place on earth. even
Yeah.
having a wonderful day, even having a wonderful day with these incredibly generous friends could not possibly compare to being in heaven where he is completely healed of all of his struggles. He can understand everything that's happened in his life with perfect understanding. And he's reunited with Jeremiah, right?
Yeah.
It'd been 12 years. So all of that, he was home. So that's July 17th. That's Tony's birthday. Then all these months we were waiting. We knew that there was a warrant out for this guy's arrest and that he was just missing. So then we're just waiting, and we were actually on a trip. We were in Massachusetts, and I get a text saying they're going to have a hearing because the man is in custody on July 17th. 1 year later,
Wow.
he's suddenly in custody and they have a hearing. So, what difference does it make? Is it just another traumatic birthday for Tony? To me, it was like God saying, "I didn't forget. I know what day it is. I know this is what you guys are thinking about today. And I just want you to know that I'm still at work, that I'm still in control, and that I'm still loving you," right? This guy, he could have no phone. He could have broken off connections with all of his family. It doesn't matter. God knew exactly where he was. So I haven't heard the whole of that story. I'm curious. I don't know what it's like from that man's perspective. Maybe I'll get to hear whether did he turn himself in that day because it had been weighing on him for a year. Did he do something foolish and get picked up, and there was a warrant out for his arrest or whatever? I don't know. I don't know. But God knew exactly what was happening, and he was not, he wasn't asleep at the switch again. Like he knew what day it is. He knew what we were going through, remembering where we'd been a year before, and he wanted us to know that he was right there with us.
Yeah. Yeah. Our Father's a God of justice.
Yeah,
You were saying that Josiah most likely saved his life that night.
yeah. This is my own personal theory, but it's based on the fact that I traveled that same road a lot a couple years ago when Linnea was doing a homeschool co-op, and to get from our house to where the church was, where the co-op was actually right next to where Josiah died. The way that these cars had been traveling was on this straight stretch of the road. But just beyond that straight stretch was the way that we would come when we would be going to this church. And the roads right there is so curvy that it was scary to come that way in the wintertime when it was slippery. And even in the summertime, I had gone where it was like, "Ooh, I'm going a little too fast, slow down," because they're just literally, there's probably 5 or 6 really sharp turns right there. So this is my theory. This man was probably traveling 80 to 90 miles an hour. If he had not hit Josiah and he had gone into those curves, I don't think he would have survived. Now, Josiah had determined to obey God and to go wherever he led him. And God was gracious enough to lead him home. And at the same time, saved this man's life by stopping him from trying to hit those curves at that speed. So I think that by Josiah dying, it did save his life. Because I don't think he's ready. I don't know about now. I don't think he was ready that night to meet his maker. And Josiah was.
It's so hard because, you don't want your son to be a sacrifice for someone, right?
No, no, no.
But
And
that's what God did for us.
yeah, exactly. And that's what, perhaps he would dare to die for a righteous man, but God chose to send Jesus for us when we had no righteousness of our own, to die in our place. That's exactly what Jesus did.
You're still awaiting the trial, and I know recently you traveled all the way from Phoenix to Alaska only to arrive there and get a voicemail.
Yeah. got delayed again. So there's been multiple times over the last, now July 17th will be 2 years. So it's, I don't know what, like 20 months now that we've been waiting for something to happen. And we would listen in to the hearing, and then there'd be some reason or another why it got delayed again. Sometimes it was because they didn't know where he was, and sometimes they had him, one or the other side wasn't ready to proceed to trial, or there was a scheduling conflict or something. It's been moved several times. So this last time, it had been scheduled for the end of February, and I flew up there for the trial. And I arrived, turned my phone off airplane mode, and had a voicemail saying that that morning, which was supposed to be jury selection day, it got delayed again. So now it's delayed until the end of May. Similarly to Linnea's journey, when I had to learn a lot of medical stuff, I'm learning a lot about the legal system that I never really wanted to know.
You know, your family has gone through so much. On the one hand, it's like it's not fair. It's not fair. And I'm so sorry that you had to go through those things. There really aren't human enough words to even say about any of it. But I'm so thankful that God's been with you and your family through every step of this. What would you say to someone who is going through a similar situation right now, who might happen to be watching this video if we ever get it up?
Yeah, I would say I'm sorry. I've had people say, I can't imagine what you're going through. And I always say, don't try. There's no need. Because there's no point in trying to imagine hard things, because hard things are going to come. These are my hard things, our hard things. Everybody's going to have suffering. And if you're not suffering, you will be. I hate to say that way. I don't want to be harsh, but that's the way life is. Something's going to happen. And so there's no point in trying to imagine somebody else's pain, because it'll be different for you. But what won't be different is God. God will be the same. He will be the same loving, providing, comforting, strengthening, peace-giving God that he's always been, that he's been for me, that he's been for millions of people for generations. I would say pray that God would help you see, that you would see his hand. And if you know somebody who's going through a really difficult time, pray that for them, that they would be able to see God's hand active in their life, that he would help them to just notice and remember and hold on to those moments, because he's promised to be near to the brokenhearted. He's promised to be an ever-present help in times of trouble. I've found him to be that. But these are promises from him. They're not just for me, they're for everyone. I do think, it's a human thing, and was one of the questions I think that your friend brought up about asking why. Why me? Why us? Something that I feel like God showed me or whispered to me after Jeremiah died was, we don't tend to ask why me when good things happen. And yet most of us go through, especially here in the Western world, most of us go through most of our days with a lot of good things happening. And we take those for granted, like that's just the way it should be. And it's not until hard things come that we wonder why. And someone right after Jeremiah died was just said that a better question was, what now? Like, it's a more useful question, not why did this happen to me, but why did this happen to me, as in, what do you want to do with it? What are you doing with it? Where are you going to take us from here? So what now? What now in our story? So it does feel like with each of these big things, like God has given us new qualifications, new like graduate degrees in sorrow and grief. I've learned so much about grief and about pain and really feel like everybody's hurting. Everybody is going through hard things, and it doesn't have to look the same, right? It goes back to like people trying to imagine what I'm going through. Well, there's people that have had their marriages break up. There's people who have lost jobs that they thought was their forever job. There's people whose houses have burned down. There's a lot of things, very painful things out there that I haven't experienced, right? There are people suffering all around us. And I feel like that has been one of the biggest, I don't know if it's a lesson or just realization that has hit Tony and I both from all of this is realizing, like, for instance, now if we watch the news and there's some sort of violent crime, and Phoenix is a big city and things happen, and honestly this really weird perspective shifts happen, like situations where there's been a young man who has done something just horrific to another person, right? And they show this young man and he's just covered in tattoos and he's just scowling at the camera like, I'm not even sorry, right? And I see that and I'm just like, what happened? What are you so afraid anybody's going to see? What is the pain inside of you that you're putting all of this on so that nobody sees that, right? It's a different perspective. Whereas before I would have been all about, string them up or lock them away and throw away the key, or just all about the victim, the obvious victim in the situation. And clearly there's pain there, that clearly that person had people that loved him and all of that. Also, this person over here is suffering. And what about his mother, right? And he has a mother and he has family, even if he's not in contact with them, that are suffering. I just feel like we've gotten a much broader perspective on suffering and grief. I felt like after Jeremiah died, I got my definition of grief broadened so far, which is kind of odd because it was kind of a classic form of grief, when you have somebody that dies. But it felt like suddenly I could see grief all over the place in other people's lives and the things that they were going through. And now it feels like after Josiah, it's like just pain and suffering everywhere. Paul said to pray without ceasing. I feel like that is where I'm at, because I feel like I can see the things that God is doing more clearly than I could at one time. But I feel like also I'm seeing the hurt in our world more clearly than I ever did before either, also, I guess, which causes me to pray. So every siren, every homeless person I see on the side of the road, a young person who looks like whatever they took is not having the effect that they hoped it would have. It's praying for people all the time. And I can't hardly stand to watch the news because of that. I read an email that gives me the highlights because there's more than enough suffering just in going through my day to pray about. Then
Yeah.
yeah.
God has uniquely equipped you. Things that you've gone through haven't been for waste. Your compassion and your empathy has, it sounds like you're seeing the world how God sees the world.
Somewhat we're growing, right? And it's probably going to become more so until we're home. We're not going to see it perfectly, but I had mentioned, Linnea's story and everything that she has gone through, and what God might want to do with that. And it was interesting. Yesterday, we were actually at an appointment at Phoenix Children's, and we went in the cafeteria, and she was hungry. I got her something to eat. We checked out. This young woman, processed our things and took our money. And as we walked away, I was thinking, she really just looked like she was something was really wrong. And I tried to be, extra friendly and smiled and, just thanked her. But as we were walking away, and Linnea said, "Did you see that woman? Like, she's really suffering." So I said, "Yeah, I did." And I told her, I believe that God shows us those things for a reason, that, she may have had, she may have been working there all day. I don't know if she was starting or ending her shift, but God had us come through at just that time when whatever was hitting her hard, so that we can pray for her. So let's just do that. That's all we say. That's all we can do. Like, that's nothing, right? What's the most we can do? Ask the God of the universe to give her what she needs. That's the most that we can do, because he can actually change whatever the situation is, or whatever she's feeling, or give her the comfort or the strength or whatever it is she needs. He knows what it is. He knows what the actual need is, not even the perceived need. Like, we could hear her story and go, "Oh, you need a loan, or you need a car, or you need a hug, or whatever." And each of those things might have helped a little bit, but it's not the maybe not the root thing, and God knows what that is. So the best thing we can do for them is to pray to the one who can see what the actual need is and loves her more than we ever could or anyone ever could. So to use that to spur us on to pray, hopefully do practical things too, meet the needs that we can meet. But let's not say, "Well, I guess the least we can do is pray," right? That's the most we can do. The other things will probably also help too, hopefully, but prayer will definitely.
I think also for us to be aware and open to the little nudges that God gives us, so that we in turn can also be, the hands and feet to someone
Mhm.
who, is in need today, like you
Yes.
were multiple times.
Yeah.
Wow. I'm just so thankful that we have the good news.
Yeah.
We know where your boys are.
Hmm.
Yeah. You have such a gift for expression and writing. You have a beautiful blog. So, where can people connect with you?
Well, I love to tell stories about the faithfulness of God, and I love to share how he's been faithful to me. So I named my website greatisyourfaithfulness.com.
For any viewers who are watching this video, thank you for spending time with us. Please leave your prayer requests down in the comments, and we would be honored to pray for you. For more inspirational stories like this, please do the YouTube thing and, hit notifications and subscribe. And we'll have more stories of how God's working in people's lives, and the highs and the lows. Thank you for being with us today. Thank you, Laura.
Yeah,
You're
for
so
sure.
loved.
Thanks for having me.